dirt road and a couple of farms, so we've been down in the area for 100 years, so, but this is a really nice field. I would hate to see that not be paved.
And Hammerly also.
I mean, granted, the city parcel is very shrubby and perfect, and it's not really, you know, one you kind of want to go to walk on.
The city
Can't you put it bluntly?
No, we're just
The city parcel is not marked up though, is it?
Yeah, this is the city parcel right here.
I have a parcel map here. This
Yeah, it had a very, very narrow frontage on Spruce Lane. It was,
Pardon me?
it had a very narrow,
Yeah, it has a narrow frontage on Spruce Lane.
yeah, 'cause that line's
This
not
is
here.
similar
Yeah,
to the
you
map
don't
that
have
one's
it. You don't have
that was
it.
at the Conservation Commission
And
meeting.
this Sherry
It just has more
Sherry,
parcels.
Sherry
marked
actually
out.
owns what's in front of the parcel.
Right.
I got my letter.
So it shows, I guess this is,
Yeah, it's like, because see, at one point, this was all one parcel,
right,
and it became the city, and then the city sold off what the Townsends
You
made.
guys get a letter?
okay.
And
But
made,
there's still
yeah,
a
there's
corridor,
still, yeah, down to the,
you know.
and there's, this is me over here.
What was that?
This is me, this is my brother.
Yeah.
The part,
Yeah.
the trust.
I've heard from a few other people that I don't think are here.
Good.
So I
This is the
haven't
area
heard
down here.
from
where
the hundred consumers.
This is this little area here.
There's like a little, yeah, a little.
Response. There's a few neighbors from Spruce Lane Extension that are coming.
That was the,
That's me.
no, you're up here. This is.
And there was another.
Road,
she was just saying, oh, sorry.
Road, yeah. He was the
Yeah, the city
gentleman.
was all together. No, I got an email today.
And Carol, yeah,
And there was a gentleman.
or, and Spruce
I
Lane.
found my note.
And actually, part of it, all of like the enforcement and stuff is actually this, on Spruce Lane Extension. Yeah, so a lot of what they do is actually, yeah, is actually on Spruce Lane. They've been paying and using it in the.
Are you Heidi?
I am.
Okay.
What is your name?
Sherry Townsend.
Okay,
Yeah, RSVP.
Today? yep. That's good. We were just looking. I had heard from a few other people that aren't here,
Okay.
so we might wait a few
Sure.
minutes
Okay.
to make sure.
It's kind of hard to figure out to get here too, because I went a different way, and I was up in West Edge, and
Oh,
this
no.
road is kind of,
It's best to go like 4 and then just get off at the exit.
I don't like that.
I
I like moving to town.
don't.
I have some specific routes that I need to take to keep
But I put
myself.
on town for,
Yeah. So,
sit in traffic, even in Dover.
She just got into that school.
Which one?
hello.
Atlantic.
Really, that's a shot?
Kyle.
Kyle just did.
Hi, Mr. Rowe.
Oh my gosh, she must be so excited.
Heidi.
Oh my God, look at that, salsa, 2
Thanks for
berries.
coming. I do have
I love it.
a lab
Actually,
area.
was
Do you want to take
James
one?
Blunt.
I have a larger one for
James
discussion.
Blue was in Squaw's Club too, I
Oh,
think.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah, like the Bowie Club.
Hi.
Morning.
How are you? We need to be from the summer school, so I'm here to say, here it is, see you, just for a week. but-
Not me. Not you.
So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
one of them said she had a little bit.
But I was going to live here.
No.
It's getting worse.
It's in, yeah, they're, I mean, most of these houses have been here quite a while. These three doubles, these like extension.
I'm Jim.
I'm Sherry Townsend.
Hi, good to meet you.
I'm Laura.
Laura Rowe. Jeffrey Rowe. Nice to meet you.
I do, 'cause I used to live, Amy and I, yeah, Amy and I, we cut across here, and go across here, and we go out, and we go around back down.
Well, everything is,
It's like a couple hours
I
each,
see.
couple hour pack.
The only issue we ever had was the black racer, black tarp thing. My horse did not like your black. They were, I think it was the snake thing they were doing out there.
Yeah,
And they had black plastic bags on the ground. Yeah, my horse was not keen on those, but.
Oh, because he saw him and got spooked?
Yeah,
Yeah.
didn't care for the black plastic. I didn't.
sometimes, when the neighbors look right to them,
Yeah.
they sort of freak a little bit.
He's still like that. He's like 30-something years old out in the backyard, and it's like a plastic bag blows in the paddock, and he's stuck.
I figured what you did. Where am I? I couldn't find it. They're over there.
It's funny, after we did a big cut,
Recognize the
I
dirt.
mean, last time I came, it's been a couple years since David and I went out, we've just been all over the place.
Yeah.
But that's good, we had such distinct trails.
Actually,
They
showed you
Yeah,
that.
business.
What's that?
Business is being
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's built easy. Yeah. No, I assume. Just a quick.
Yeah.
He left a message with me.
Yeah, you're
Hi.
right. Hi.
Hi.
I don't know if you knew John.
I didn't.
I don't think it's very active with fishing games, he did a lot of travel. Yeah.
I did a little bit more. My
It was
journey.
2011. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming. There's a map there for reference.
A couple of my neighbors are here. Well, bunches of my neighbors are here. Okay. Yeah. Good. Wonderful. Thank you. Good. Hi, Sherry. Laura. Hi. Yeah. So Peter, this is Peter Mason. This is Sherry Townsend, who has the.
That's fine.
And Laura and Jeff Rowe that live in the 1640 house.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that's.
Well, no,
1600s that, the red house.
it's just, I don't know.
The deer will.
Short turkey.
Oh, that's
So
their
conversations
No.
get out of.
No, the truck, that's Chris and Diane, the truck, where the red.
I don't know.
On the left.
Yeah,
Well,
It's my turn.
No, not
Yeah.
one.
We could go visit him.
Where are we?
He had to drop some.
we have a couple of homes to go, not go more than.
Oh, yeah, I have to. I totally agree. I think it's a large truck. I can see it here too. I didn't have a chance to talk to
Yes,
him.
Hello, Mary, by the way. I'm Mary.
Yeah, shoot. Please do all that travel together.
Oh, okay.
I went over and saw Joe when I was there. So I told Joe about the plants down there. He said years ago, the state planted along the highway. Yeah, and then this Mr. Higgins or Huggins or whatever it was, somebody down there, that guy planted it around his house too. The birds wanted it all off that night, all down
No, they don't, until the.
But I don't know when they planted it, but they planted it someplace, probably between the roads, next to the roads or whatever. Found out it took all over everything, so they, but the thing is, the stuff they're talking about, we don't, that isn't in our field. Because we went home. But what I'm saying is, that's not that they're saying, it's like, it's, wherever it is, it's still there. It's not that stuff that I thought was in our field. It's something else. Because ours is, it grows to be a more, 3 foot high, maybe 6 feet high. And it's a long string on top, it's got like 3 shoots that come out with these little flat pod things that are on it. Kind of like straw, but not quite. It's a weird little, in the animal, but the horses don't like it. There's one section of our field that's got, that it's the old pasture. The last 4 or 5 years, yeah. It seems to be getting more and more. Last year, I didn't pick that up.
Just
When
waiting
it
for,
got about that high, before the
one other
went out,
person who
I
had
mowed it down with the,
so I figured maybe
this
it's
mower.
gonna pass.
And then I got about that high again, and I mowed it down before it go to seed. I wanna see what happens, hopefully, and if it doesn't come in as thick, I'll still, maybe it'll,
Yeah, we
maybe it'll
just,
kill
I
it
was
off, right?
maybe in just a minute.
You know, just like not letting that seed out. It's only in where it is, it's in this, it's in my little field, like right off this hill. It's in this narrow section down here.
That's what I was
It's not in the wider field here, and it's not in our long field here, it's just in that area here. Yeah, a little further down. It's kind of in the shaded, damper area of the field. It's roughly in my burn pile area. You know, where my burn pile is, it's in that area. But there's nothing in the bigger field. Yeah. But I burned downhill.
Something don't. Something don't germinate or come to life, if you will, without fire.
Yeah. Well, I burned in a hole. I dug it out years ago with the dirt. Throw all the brush in that one section. You know, and that section never grows up because it's always like last year there was 5 or 6 years of burning, and I took all that ash stuff and I dumped it up next to my barn. That barn I built up back for the machine, I just wanted a little more width. So I lugged all that crap up and dumped it. You know, back there, because that hill's steep enough, so when you drive up the back road, once it gets around, it's a little hairy.
You see my chicken trail?
Well, it's 10
No, I haven't. No, I didn't notice. Tonight when we came out, there was somebody flying down.
Well, I think we're gonna get started. We gave it a few extra minutes just in case people had trouble
Yeah.
finding the location, but it's 10 past and I don't wanna keep you here longer, since you've already taken your own time. So again, I'm Heidi Holman. I'm the biologist that's working as the lead for New Hampshire Fish Game on the New England Cottontail project. I'm there to answer questions to anyone and do the planning process for activities and coordinate with partners. There are a few other people from Fish and Game representing here tonight. Want to introduce themselves?
I'm John Cantor. I'm the coordinator of the Non-Game and Endangered Species Program at Fish and Game.
And I'm Jim Ayler, State Lands Habitat Biologist for Fish and Game, which means I oversee the management of most of the Fish and Game owned properties across the state, including Bellevue.
So hopefully between the three of us, we'll be able to answer your questions that you may have. Again, our primary purpose was to come here and have an opportunity for us to have a discussion. We wanted to notify you of an action that we wanted to take in the area. We are going to be releasing New England Cottontail Rabbits in the state of New Hampshire. And our primary start for this is at the Bellamy Wildlife Management Area, and also the adjacent city of Doverland, which lies within the vicinity of the Bellamy WMA. We'd like to incorporate them into our management planning, and so we have approached them. And as part of that meeting, they said, well, you should perhaps give an opportunity for this notification. We sent letters and provided this. So really, we don't have a lot to say. We really want to be here to listen to your questions and answer anything that may come up. I heard that a few people showed up at the meeting on Monday night as well. We have had an additional action that we've requested participation from the city of Dover, which is an herbicide application on Phragmites. It's in a tidal area. It's what we call an exemplary natural community in Brackish Marsh in the state of New Hampshire. And so Jim will be able to provide a little bit more insight about that action as well. So we're ready to answer any questions about both of those while we're here tonight. So
I guess we'll start with how you're gonna apply that pesticide to those bushes, because that is, my hay fields are on the other side of that land where you wanna put that stuff on.
Yep. Phragmites is a grass. It's can grow up to 7 to 8 feet tall. It was imported from Europe, and there's no natural controls here in America to keep that plant in check. So if we allow it to grow unchecked, it will gradually take over the brackish marsh areas. The area is about, the patch is about a quarter of an acre, although half of it, the half that occurs on Fish and Game owned property, was treated back in 2010, summer of 2010, with a foliar spray application. So they have backpack pumps, that they go in there and they spray the Phragmites. There are requirements for minimizing the amount of drift. So basically, if you saw no impacts on your hayfield back in 2010 when it was done on the WMA, you're not going to see any impacts on your hayfield when it's done this summer.
Well, I'm not really worried about my hayfield, it's more the animals that eat the stuff.
Oh yeah, no, there shouldn't be any concern. This herbicide is the same that many homeowners use to control weeds in their driveway or walkways, or control poison ivy in their backyard so their kids don't get it. I use it in my own backyard to control poison ivy. Perhaps some of you do as well.
So that's what I was saying, I was just wondering what type of chemical it was.
It's the same active ingredient in Roundup. It's a different formulation that we can use in wetland areas.
I'm from Stratton, and the Phragmites that were around the Discovery Center were discovered to be, in fact, native.
No, that's very true. That's very
I
true.
just wondered if you maybe ascertain whether these are native plants or whether they're the import.
Indeed we did. Indeed we did. It's the import.
Okay.
Do you provide any guarantees if there's a problem?
Guarantees if there's a problem.
If for some reason something goes wrong with the spray, or it's the wrong concentration, or something happens to adjacent animals, something happens to property?
Boy, there's no likelihood of that occurring. And
Murphy's Law, and Mother Nature's very sensitive, and you're talking hayfields and people make their living and feed their animals, and their animals feed on that, so it always makes people nervous like us when you say, oh, could never ever happen, no problem. And then there's that one instance where it happens and there's no protection, there's no nothing. So that's...
Does anybody here use herbicides at all on their property?
No.
I use Roundup.
Yeah.
I think the best answer for that is when we go through a contracting process for any vendor for a state contract or action, they're required to have some sort of liability insurance for the work that they do. And so they would be liable for a mistake that they did conducting work under their time. It wouldn't be us, and that's how that would work. The state itself is not insured. We do that as a choice. We pay out as things happen, just so you're aware, but it would be under the liability of the person who was hired to cover that damage.
Do you know who the contractor will be at this point?
We have a state vendor right now,
Mike Morrison,
yeah.
Swamp Inc.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, you probably knew. He grew up in the
He grew up in
area.
that neighborhood.
Mike Morrison, he grew up in that neighborhood.
He grew up right, right down the street from me.
Under that, I'm just familiar with the other, with other contracting services that we have, and it's at a minimum of, I believe it's up to $2 million liability now that the contractor has to. So that's, a contract vendor with the state has to have a liability policy that covers up to $2 million, minimum of $2 million.
I have a question, actually, are you guys familiar with Four Corners on the map? If you follow, I know my neighbors are, but
I don't know that local name.
it's,
It's off the Garrison Road where you guys cut all the wood out.
Okay, so this general area,
I have a question about.
Tuttle Lane, would you consider
Yep, this-
Tuttle Lane? No, that's first one. It's
And
further
this is
down.
David Tuttle Lane.
David Tuttle Lane.
This is Spruce Lane here.
Spruce Lane, David Tuttle is the wood one that, yeah, actually that is it.
yeah,
And so the Four Corners would actually be.
yep,
Well,
sure.
last winter, all of a sudden it was clear cut. And none of the neighbors, none of us were notified about anything. And I actually have a neighbor that I work with at UNH sometimes, and he called Fish and Game. And ironically, it was Fish and Game that had done it. So it looks like a war zone.
So
So,
back in here, this
Yes.
area right here, we did a 22-acre clear cut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
And,
then, but none of us were notified, and then up after the clear cut, little signs popped up saying it was for New England Cottontail Habitat.
yes.
And
the list,
I just kind of, it was ironic that we weren't notified till after.
the list that I used to send this batch of letters out came from the same list that letters were sent prior to the habitat work happening.
Okay.
There may have been one or two names that the tax parcel map did not reflect a recent transaction of a landowner, and I did receive 2 back from this recent mailing. But this list came from that same list that was used prior to that work. And it was a notification about how we were going to start conducting habitat management on the Bellamy over a series of years.
Have you seen the clear cut, though? Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm responsible for the clear cut.
Okay, well, I just can't imagine a rabbit wanting to be there.
Well, perhaps not right now, but it's soon growing up into what it will be definitely suitable habitat for New England cottontails. They like what's referred to as young forest habitat, really dense, lush, young trees coming up, perhaps with some flowering shrubs and grasses and whatnot in between. And so to get that sort of habitat quickly, a good way to do that is actually to cut trees. And it regrows, and admittedly, to us, it looks ugly for the first few years.
Yeah, why would they
But,
allow
wildlife-
those big
Yes.
dead logs laying there? I mean, there was big stuff that they did not wanna deal with and they just left it.
Yeah, and in some cases, that felled stuff is actually really good wildlife habitat for a variety of things. Cottontails will burrow underneath those and make those little hiding holes for themselves. Snakes will use those areas, salamanders will use those areas as the area regenerates and grows back up. So leaving dead wood on the ground, even big chunks, can actually be beneficial for wildlife. Again, it doesn't look good to us, but wildlife love it.
Well, it just looked like they just left what they didn't wanna deal with. In other words, they didn't leave any, say, 12-inch diameter stuff. They left this stuff that's 3 feet diameter and it's all knotty and,
Yeah.
just.
And from our perspective, from wildlife biologists, that's just fine.
And there's some dead snags that should have gone and they left them standing.
Oh, snags, we like snags, dead snakes, because the wildlife use those as well. So the things that look pretty to us,
Yeah,
or don't look pretty to us, wildlife love it.
well, where the ones I saw are on the road that goes down back and it's close to the trail or the road.
Yes, that's it.
And that's why I thought they were kind of concerned that, because it's in an area where people go through, why would they leave those there? If it was out in the middle somewhere, it's like, yeah, but this is right on the tree line. It's right on the road line, I put it, because you didn't go, say, to the,
You didn't leave
Dover
it
side
around
of the-
trees or like bushes or anything, which I would think, I don't know. The other question I have is, when is the last time New England Cottontail was seen in this property or this area? Does anybody have any data?
Very
on that?
recently.
Yeah, this year, we did not document the New England Cottontail there, but it's been hit or miss throughout the past 10 years. But we did see one the previous year. There's an area where there's some aspen regeneration and a wet draw, not far from the parking lot. So typically in this general vicinity, we've seen them. It's a very low use. And so that indicates to us that the habitat quality has been declining for a while, and that what we're finding are probably dispersing juveniles that are coming from a core population that's over towards the west of the area. So more than likely the core of the rabbits is coming from here, and it's offspring that are dispersing, looking for new places, and maybe they're not finding a mate, so they're not capable of reproducing more, and also the habitat quality isn't there, hasn't been there prior to this work to support them. So that's the story as we understand it with the population now.
Do you plan on doing anything to control predators?
Yes.
That's a great question. So, I'm just gonna see. So, the way we see it and that we understand is if you create high quality habitat, and to us that high quality is a minimum of 10 acres, closer to 20 is ideal, of a really thick shrubland that they can hide in. Now, the other reason that this is important is that they eat the buds and the bark of those shrubs in the winter because there's no grass or herbaceous food available. And so they need a large enough patch of it to supply them throughout that whole time. So if we create that habitat, they don't need to run out from the thicket that protects them from the predators, and they survive. So if we create the habitat, the predators aren't an issue anymore. I know that this is very hard to believe, and so what we're going to do is do some radio telemetry with all the individuals that we release into the landscape in the first few years to try and determine if they're surviving, how they're dying, if it's because of predators and an overabundance of them, or is it some other cause that we haven't been able to maybe mitigate the risks for, and then we'll make decisions in the future. A lot of people definitely would like to see us do predator control, and a lot of people wouldn't. And so it's a very sensitive action that before we proceed down that road, we need a little bit more information.
Of course, the rabbits have developed one tremendous mechanism for overcoming the problem with predators, and that's by creating lots of rabbits quickly. And so because their strategy for survival is to be able to produce a lot of young at a very young age, the population growth. And it's simply at this point in time we kind of reached a point where the forests of New Hampshire have nicely regrown and now cover 80% of the state. But there's always been in the New England forested landscape, there's always been a series of old beaver wetlands, flooded areas that were burned by Native Americans to provide openings, provide more forage for game or for agriculture. And as those natural processes have been kept in check, whether it's through dams on rivers or fire control and such, the habitats that these guys depended on are few and far between. So their natural ability to produce a lot of young and stuff, they should be able to take, if the habitat's good, a fairly high rate of predation. But as Heidi said, we'll be certainly evaluating that as we're trying to restore.
Are you going to, as this area that you just logged, as that grows up, like say 20 years from now, are you going to be logging other areas, or maybe 10 years from now? Or
something that needs a constant management. And we will need to work in a coordinated effort with landowners to maintain enough at any one time. And so the way we see it,
Hang on, what exactly does that mean? You speak in very elevated terms. What does that mean? Does that mean you acquire land from property owners? Does that
No.
mean you impact property owners' ability to do things on their land to support your habitats? Can
Yes.
you be more clear?
sure,
about
no,
that?
I can. And I said we would work with landowners to try and create that habitat that's necessary for the rabbits over time. So it's to work with them. And our current approach right now is to use NRCS programs that often they're already enrolled in to provide us an additional project to create this wildlife habitat on their property. So it's a choice. We ask and we say, oh, would you like to create habitat for New England Cottontails?
So are you saying that there are maybe instances where you offer them money in exchange for their land? I don't understand
No,
the particulars of what you're saying would be a partnership.
A partnership is we work with private landowners. We say, this rabbit needs a different type of stewardship in the area to create suitable habitat. So in Durham, in Dover. And so we approach landowners and talk about what is necessary, and they decide for themselves whether or not they want to enroll in a program that would help create the habitat. In no way do we usurp any ownership rights. There's no easements, there's no nothing. It's a standard agreement that they enter into that they will maintain the habitat for 10 years. But they're very aware of that when they're enrolling in the program. The other people we'll be working with are towns like the city of Dover or the city of Lee. And again, we're working with them to help match up maybe with another entity like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to get habitat work done. That's the only thing we're doing, is just we're asking people to become stewards, because if you're not doing varieties of practices such as agriculture or timber or whatever, it's how you manage your properties that affect how wildlife exists in this state. And we're just here to say, this species, it needs something different. Would you be willing to do something differently to change that? And that's what we're doing right now. That's our approach.
And there is funding available to help the landowners get the habitat to the condition that's suitable for New England Cottontails. And then these programs are not only available to enhance habitat for New England Cottontails, but these programs could be, any landowner in the state could use these programs to enhance habitat for wildlife, whatever their wildlife interest is.
And that is used in combination. I mean, in this, you know, in an entire scheme of conservation, you know, there are, you know, we do approach landowners about, you know, purchasing easements and you know, fee ownership and stuff. I mean, so buying and protecting land or easements is a part of a conservation strategy. How you just describing is much of, you know, what's going on with the cottontail habitat, because they're occurring in they rely on these, you know, disturbed habitats there's often opportunity on private land, and NRCS funds are available, Natural Resource Conservation Service funds, in order to, you know, provide some financial incentives to offset costs associated with doing habitat work.
Thank you. Actually, my question was, on the relevant wildlife management area land, will you be doing more lumbering
Sure.
as
So
this grows out? I didn't mean adjacent lands, I meant.
Jim and I were talking about this in the context of the rabbit, and I'll let him speak to the actual activities. But we do look at it as different areas in age. So Jim, do you want to?
So these areas that are sort of this speckling area here, these are the areas that we are aiming to get into habitat suitable for New England Cottontails. And there are a whole variety of other wildlife that have been dwindling that require the same type of habitats. A variety of songbirds, among them grouse and woodcock. And so as these areas develop, yes, we're going to need to be able to maintain them. So As an area matures and gets out of suitable condition for those suites and species, we will probably bring in some sort of heavy-duty mowers and set them back once again. And then we're gonna sort of rotate that around the property. So, you know, this area might be the first that sort of grows out of that good stage for cottontail. So you go back there and mow a portion of that. And then 5 years from now, this area might be grown up past that stage. So you go there and hit that. So you're gonna do sort of a rotation around the property, hitting the more mature stuff, set it back, so that you always have a good amount of suitable habitat on the property at any one time. Does that make sense?
Doing that mowing and cutting in the winter? I mean, not always, but in general, would it be in the winter?
In general, it'll be in the winter time because that's all the energy reserves are in the root system, which allows a better flush of stems in the spring.
What about, go ahead.
I mean, it's just kind of a request, because I know that a lot of people use the area for recreation too, and over the years, there's been a tremendous trail system. And I know a couple of years ago, when you did one of these cuts, it just like you didn't even know where the trails were anymore. And you're out there with the horses and there's slash everywhere. If they could just be mindful enough to understand that, you know, we all love that area, and I understand what you're trying to do, but the people that really support this also want to be able to access it in a reasonably safe manner, and if those like kind of established trails could be left sort of.
Some of the established trails were
Cross country and horses and.
some of the established trails were established without any input from Fish and Game.
Well,
To
they,
be honest.
but in all honesty, they predated, I mean, my family's been down there 100 years. We grew up snowmobiling out there and everything. So those trails have been there, like,
Been there
forever.
Those trails were there when 25 ladies owned that property. 25 people bought that property years before Fish and Game owned it. And the snowmobile trails have been there.
And
I'm gonna butt in here for a minute. I own this, and this piece, my mother owns that. You're talking about putting there, because I talked to Heidi about this, but I haven't shown you guys. Sometimes I cut this piece at night. So if the rabbits are in here, and if I cut this at night and there's several or 1, 10, 30 dead rabbits in my field, am I gonna be held responsible for mowing them down when I didn't see them? Or whatever, she told me no, but I wanted to.
That should have been a
let
simple
everybody else
answer.
know.
Sure. Well,
Because
I think I am the best to answer that is the fact that, again, how you were saying, the way the habitat is being maintained, because you're mowing it periodically throughout the year, that they're not going to be there. That's just not where they're gonna select to be. And
I'm
so,
sorry, but that's
said
not
they
answering
like
the question.
brush, hay is this high.
sure,
They're going to like that,
sure.
hiding in that.
Yes, and so, again, it's going in and not creating the habitat and creating the interaction. You know, we will not be able to document the impact to the rabbits in that type of situation, but ideally, as I mentioned before, we do have that candidate conservation agreement with assurances. So basically, if you're very, very concerned, then we have a management agreement that we can do that just completely.
I think you're missing the point.
No.
He doesn't want to be held liable, and you don't have the common decency to say he will or he won't be.
That's all we wanna know.
Period.
We shouldn't have to enter into an agreement.
This is your guys' little play game out there. You guys get to do what you want out there. Quite frankly, that's our property, and you're spending our money, and we don't like what you're doing.
Sure.
And you don't have the decency to tell that man that he won't be held liable now or in the future for your rabbit program. Have some decency.
Well, I'm gonna pipe in here and say that, well, this is the state of New Hampshire property. This is held in trust by the Fish and Game Department for all New Hampshire residents. The wildlife of the state is held in trust.
Yeah, part
For
of our
all-
old property. Okay.
For
So
all,
we care about it too.
right, but, so it's held in public trust for all of us, and we have a species which is, as we say, circling the ball. And our charge on behalf of the people of New Hampshire is to prevent the extinction of this animal.
Aren't you about 30 or 50 years late, quite frankly? Yes, is the answer. You should have been thinking about this before, when they started to decline. I mean, you're way behind the 8 ball, and man is here once again trying to put a square peg into a round hole. And you're pissing away a lot of money, and for what?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you how the program is supported here.
I know how it's
in New
supported, I
Hampshire.
did my research.
And how is it supported then?
The state gave about $50,000, and it's getting donations. The federal wildlife management put some money in. I know what's going on.
Heidi went through the list before, but what I just heard you say was because you have this responsibility to members of the state of New Hampshire to support your program, what that tells me is that any landowner who's unfortunate enough to abut your property is going to suffer the consequences of whatever you need to do to maintain your program. And what we're saying to you is that that is not acceptable to us, and you're not able to say to us, Jeff, if that happens, you will not be held liable, you are simply working your land, we would never do that to you. That's what we want to hear. That question has been asked numerous times, and we've not heard any assurances to that. So I think you can understand that he's in a position now where he could be held criminally responsible, however it is, if you folks decide, hey, you took out this animal and you didn't have a right to do that, and he's repeatedly asked you, and he shouldn't have to sign an agreement with you for some sort of protection when he's simply working his land.
The agreement is not for protection from us. Again, it's an agreement of assurances. It is exactly what you're saying. The agreement is with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we know what is going on at this stage of the game. You know, all of our actions are to prevent it from becoming federally listed. If we are successful, then it won't be federally listed. If it becomes federally listed, all I have for you is this assurances through the CCAA. That's all I can give you tonight for that next stage, because I am not the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is the tool that they've given me. So what I'm saying is, in the current state of how you are managing that land, the impact to the rabbits, there is no impact that we know about, that we are monitoring. It is not the state. In the future, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will be making that judgment call. And all I can give you is this agreement that defines what will happen if the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were to take over that call.
Is that like, because I'm the town planner there, we have the Blanding's turtle, which is an endangered species. So you have a development come in, and if it's located within, I don't know, a mile, half a mile, you know, there's no curbing, once it hits that endangered list, then everyone has restrictions.
This is
like to
endangered.
prevent it from
This is
getting-
endangered in the state of New Hampshire, as is Blanding's turtle. You
Okay.
describe the Blanding's turtles in New England Cottontail are at the same level. They're both listed as state endangered. Neither of them are listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act. So the New England Cottontail is already in the same category as Blanding's turtles. As you're describing like a wetland permitting case, the projects are evaluated for their potential impacts. Recommendations are made, like on modifications to curbing or stuff. But that's not a it's not preventing projects from going forward. It's modifying them to accommodate movements of the turtles. So it's.
Okay, I just think that's the fear, that somehow, and not that any of these people I think are having any idea of developing the land, I think they just want to, don't want to be
I think
restricted.
Basically, I don't know how to put this. Say if you have radio collars on them. It sounds like you're gonna do that so you know what's going on.
Yeah.
And the signal ceases or whatever happens, and you come down and I've mowed. But the main thing is, my mother had calves. The key word is had. And I mowed her field one morning, and I saw the cat out there. And when I came around, he was in the path, I stopped, he ran off, went up toward the house. I came back around again and the mower groaned and I went by and I diced him.
Mhm.
So the running of the machine didn't scare him off. He went back into where I was mowing, but I didn't see him the second time.
Mhm.
So if I dice up the rabbit, and like that, I won't know that I hit him until I hear the thing groan.
Yeah.
And then I'll be saying, well, what the heck was that?
Right, so when you describe the scenario, if you were out mowing.
If I'm out mowing.
And you mowed over top of some rabbits.
And I, you know,
It-
I mean, if I killed one or 20.
If you incidentally killed a rabbit, so this is now.
You know, I'm not doing it, say, purposely.
Right.
You know, I was cutting the field and instead of running off, they ran toward the danger instead of away from it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
So, that, in that situation, and now, you know, under our current condition, where they're state listed as endangered, right? Because they're currently state
Yeah.
listed as endangered, I cannot see under any scenario where anybody would, you know, where that would, technically, the rabbit died and it
Yeah.
was killed and it's endangered and you can't kill an endangered rabbit. But an officer or a judge or something incidental to that, you know, nobody is going
Well,
to.
Put that in writing.
You know, or I don't want to be financially, I mean, say those
Yeah.
collars cost $100 a piece, I'm just throwing a number at them. I don't want to be buying collars because I mowed them
If
over.
rabbits are having, you know, that level of trouble, I mean, if that, you know, there just aren't enough mowers going on around, that kind of activity is not gonna be what, you know, makes or breaks it for whether or not.
Then why don't you put that in writing to the man?
Well, I can't change law.
You can put in writing that he won't be held civilly or criminally liable if he runs over your rabbits. Yes, you can. Yes,
I'm
you
not
can.
sure what the mechanism would be for that. I think that's where the difficulty is I'm not really sure.
Listen, you people are taking control over that property. That means you're in control of it. If he has control of his property, he has control of it.
He does.
If you have competing issues, then, and you're gonna put those rabbits there, you have to hold him harmless.
And is this not come up before, and folks haven't considered that this is something that needs to be addressed?
Yep, I just want to go back to,
the cottontail.
okay.
I have a question about, how did you pick Bellamy, and are there other management areas that you picked, and how many bunnies, and
Sure.
Well,
are you
in
gonna provide?
relation to what you're saying, what I'm seeing here is, and you've said down by the four corners, you have seen cottontail.
Yeah, but a little bit further south.
There,
Yeah.
down by the
Who is we?
Down by the pond, okay,
Everywhere else,
okay.
you know,
This is all Fish and Game land.
Mm-hmm.
All of this, why wouldn't you have chosen
The
this big area?
the habitat's not suitable there.
Not yet.
Not yet. So again, we've done a lot of plantings in this area, but it's time that makes that high quality. This is still a few years out before it's high quality. But we have some high quality habitat up in this area, along the edges, and that's why we've approached the city of Dover, because they have high quality habitat that's ready now. And so they're in different timelines. And so we'd look to begin here, and then as this habitat comes online, they may naturally colonize or we'll reintroduce there. But to get back to the thing about where we see rabbits and where we don't, in your land in the mowing, we never document rabbits out in this area. And when we're currently,
At one time.
It was overgrown, and
They mowed
someone
it down
came
years
in and
ago.
mowed it down.
right, and
No, that area, yeah, the field area was overgrown,
Yeah.
because we used to have to ride around
And
it
they mowed it down.
with the horses and the snowmobiles. It
Yeah,
was
it's been mowed.
overgrown.
Which one?
It's
We
been
are looking to maintain a diversity of habitats, to maintain a diversity of wildlife on the property. So we have field areas here that we are planning on to maintain as fields for bobolinks, for turkeys, for a variety of different wildlife. This area here, we've planted in millet and buckwheat the last, 3 years I think it is, to provide a source of food for migratory waterfowl, especially in the fall. Great Bay overwinters like 80% of New Hampshire's waterfowl population. So this is a major stopover area and a major holding area. So our waterfowl biologists, we've done this in conjunction with our waterfowl biologists, provide them a source of food here during the migration.
You used to plant corn out there,
Yeah.
and why did I think that stopped.
It did stop. It stopped about somewhere around 1999. The farmer's name, I can't remember his name. Sawtell. He used to do it, and then he decided he didn't want to do it anymore, is my recollection. It's before my time, but that's what I was told. And, you know, there's not...
Yeah, there used to be that narrow strip. Right here. That used to be all cornfield.
Yeah. And that area here, we're actually converting 2 young forest shrubland habitat for cottontail. We planted a number of dogwoods and
And then they
vibrant.
put a little bit up in here too at one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we used to see it, because they go down and cut it all down in the fall and leave it so the geese would come in
Yeah.
and have it.
Yeah. So
So,
we're trying to provide some of that food, again, back in the form of millet. You know, corn is only used for a small part of the year by wildlife. And so we went to a different grain type, millet, because that is likely to be used by a greater variety of wildlife for a greater part of the year.
Okay, so I was just asking about, of course, I haven't seen the corn stalks in quite a while. I was wondering why you stopped doing that, but you're doing something else
Yeah.
instead.
How many rabbits are you talking about?
sure, okay, so there was a question about the goals for the state of New Hampshire, and we have a conservation strategy. We're part of a larger regional effort that you can find online. If you go to newenglandcottontail.org, there's a bunch of resources about this project. You'll find the conservation strategy there. So we've identified a goal of 2,000 acres in the state of New Hampshire in 2 different regions. We have the Seacoast region, which would be 6 sub-focus areas, we call them. Typically it's divided by roads or rivers or something, and then the Merrimack River Valley. So those 2,000 acres, we estimate roughly 2 acres per rabbit is what's required. So it'll be 1,000 rabbits in the state of New Hampshire. That's our goal and our commitment to the regional recovery effort. Again, that is what's going to keep them from being federally listed. In this general area, this is part of what we call the Bellamy sub-focus area. Our goal in this area is 350 rabbits and 700 acres. Now, the reason we chose Bellamy is it is a very large parcel that New Hampshire Fish Game owns. And so we have more of a commitment and an assurance that our recovery effort is going to last because we are the owners of that property. And some of the other focus areas were more dependent on private landowners, and we know that we may not be as successful in being able to have landowners change the use of their land, and so we have very low recovery goals because if we don't have the commitment from people to steward their land, then we don't want that to be part of how we decide the recovery effort happens. So that went into the planning of the strategy.
What can the abutters do to support the recovery effort?
There's a variety of things you can do. You know, obviously the first thing is we're trying to create more habitat. So you could create more habitat to expand, you know, the greater area. But I warn you that this is where you come into, if you're creating habitat and bringing the rabbits on your property, you know, then you will have them there. If you do not want the rabbits on your property, do not create the habitat or get rid of it, basically. And I just wanted to kind of use that also going back to Mr. Rowe's question. When we conduct environmental reviews at this point in time, similar to what Marcia talked about, we evaluate impacts to the rabbit only as removal of that winter cover. We do no reviews based on grassland areas, hay fields, anything of that nature. So our impact is removal of that winter cover. So if you do not want rabbits on your property, and you do not, if you're worried about any sort of liability, I'm explaining how you don't attract them to your property and how you will not be viewed as having them on your property. So, but does that answer your question?
I've got a question too.
Yeah.
There's a piece of property which I'm considering buying, which is abutting this whole area.
Sure.
And part of it is now bushes that are about 10 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
Within the next 10 years, that will probably turn into aspen, birch, that kind of, now at what point would it be not usable for rabbits?
Do you have an idea of what it looks like? Anything under 1 meter? Is it very dense, or has it already come up off the ground?
No, the part of it is abandoned, it's pretty open. There's grass.
Pretty open.
There's grass underneath. You can take
It has
take pictures.
multiple rows and.
Yeah, a lot of-
and a lot of-
I mean, it sounds good, because the rabbits do use, you know, the herbaceous food.
Yeah.
It really, until you evaluate it to see how patchy it
The piece
is.
of land is for sale,
Yeah.
and the piece down in here.
It's a-
So it doesn't look, just from the aerial photo, it doesn't look like a suitable habitat yet.
Well, that photo may not be real recent, because.
I was just showing them where the
Yeah,
wetland was.
So it's about,
It was bush hog last fall.
Oh, so then it's probably about 5 years.
Okay, yeah, that's what I part of it wasn't.
And then it would last for maybe 10 years after that, 15 years after
Okay,
that,
so
something
like
like that.
every 10 years, I should just clear it, and let it regrow.
If you want it to be bunny habitat, that'd be perfect.
Okay, or do part of it 1 5-year cycle, and then part of it.
Exactly, that's what we tell landowners to do, is to rotate it like that.
So
Right.
so you would work with us if this was our desire, is that correct?
We would.
absolutely.
And the thing is, being adjacent, timing your management with how we're managing the Bellamy is going to be most effective for the rabbits. So we know that there's always refugia that they can disperse to. So that's one way you can help the rabbit. Obviously, if you didn't have land, again, we are an agency that's supported by donations. So any money that we use to do recovery efforts requires a non-federal matching fund. So just FYI, that's another way we have people help us. Volunteer work, we hold days on some of our areas, like here at the Bellamy. We do planting projects, and we have 4 dates in the whole region that people are coming out and putting in. I think last year we did about 20 to 25,000 shrub seedlings on a variety of properties. And
What kind of shrubs are there?
yeah, there's some in Durham and Dover, and they're on the next like 3 or 4.
SRPC.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the species of the shrubs that are?
Sure. The primary species are like viburnum species, such as
Shortleaf arrowwood, the 2 dogwoods that do well in moist soil, silky and red osier. Let's see, where were some of the other ones that we planted? Virginia
Native.
rose, which is a native rose,
Oh,
Virginia rose.
not that little white rose?
Not the white, not multiflora rose, we do the native one, the Virginia one.
Is the Virginia rose the one that climbs up and sort of kills the trees, is that?
No, I don't know any rose that quite does that. You might, I wonder if you think about bittersweet?
Multiflora rose is in the trees.
Bittersweet.
Well, no,
Bittersweet.
roses are in the trees, yeah.
Huh.
I think that's the.
I haven't seen it grow up into trees.
Oh, yeah.
No, they come through, but.
Sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that.
in drier sites, we may plant juniper or bayberry.
Or gray dogwood,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it depends on the soil conditions, and if sometimes we're working with people who are expanding wetland areas on their property. So again, there's no conflict of the use that they want to do. They see this wetland area as something perhaps they're not using, but they tend to have shrubs that are perpetually there. Just the nature of wet soils is to have shrubbier species. And so we work with them to enhance those areas, and so that's different than a dry site.
Do the cottontails always need to have like a water source though? Or?
No, they get the water straight from the food that they eat.
Okay.
Yep. So we've checked with UNH professors.
Is native cranberry a possibility?
Is what?
Native cranberry?
We,
High bush, that's a viburnum.
Yeah, that's a viburnum, yeah, that'll work.
In blueberry and raspberry.
Blueberry, very good, blackberry. Well, that's the thing, as you were saying before, we're trying to create a big enough patch of habitat where it won't be of any consequence.
One thing I wanted to mention that it's a thing that's coming up here in 2 weeks. Yeah. Anyway, Stonyfield Yogurt has a 5K race thing, and it's been at least 8 years now. They were expanding before the rabbit was listed as either state endangered or Canada federal or anything. They were expanding a parking lot area in I think their whole factory. You know, the footprint of the place was expanding, and they Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife Service went down and talked to them, and there's a adjacent. I think it might be under their ownership, but it's a conservation easement. That is connected to their property, and as a way to enhance habitat for rabbits, they agreed to have that that area cut, and I think they actually put up the money for the habitat cutting there. I don't know if it's a commercial job, so it basically wasn't a commercially viable job for doing the cutting. And we went out there like the year that the cutting was done. I was like looking at it and just thinking, there's no way. It was a little it was a drier site, certainly compared to the Bellamy, which has a lot of rich soils and got a lot of aspen and birch already there. But it's worth a try because it was one of the last places in the Merrimack River Valley where the rabbits occur. And so we went out there with they have an environmental staff person and their communications person a couple months ago to take a look at it, the area and see. I've stopped by once or twice over the years to look at it. It's growing up, it's pretty good. We were more than like 2 feet off the mowed lawn around the building, and we put up our first New England Cottontail and run it out of the thing. So if you want to see what that corner is going to look like when it's good rabbit habitat, and you want to go to the Stonyfield 5K on what's that?
It's a week.
April 20th. So if you want to see, or any time, if you want to see, if you're in that area, and you want to see what that habitat will look like, the stuff that was cut recently, what that will look like in 8 or 10 years, and when it's suitable habitat, you can go by there.
What's the mortality for the first year, and also, say that we had a winter like we had this winter, would that have just wiped them all out?
Right now, our estimate is about 35% survival of all individuals. So in a wild population that's functioning the way that it should, by the time end of March rolls around, which is when they're at their bare minimum, that means they've been tried and tested by everything. 35%. Yeah. As for the second part of your question,
Like this last winter was pretty brutal, and the snow was, there's a lot of,
the more days with snow has a greater impact on their survival. So not even depth per se, because sometimes you'll get a crust and then it'll form again. So it varies, because with a rabbit, how heavy they are. Plus, if they're creating runs from the very beginning of winter, the depth never really shows up. But it's the number of days during a winter that snow is there that relates to the percentage that survive. And that just goes back to the fact that their fur doesn't change color. So it just makes them that much more higher risk for mortality. And so that also is sort of what predicts us as the northern extent of their range. They are into Maine, but it's a coastal system, and so they have less days of snow, just like we do here. And so you've got the coastal variant, and then you go into Connecticut, and they have a lot less days with snow cover. So that's a lot of rabbits there.
I have a question. I've received inquiries from people that would be interested in doing that, or properties become mature and they want to do something. But a lot of them actually own property along the rivers. And how far back would you go, like 250 feet back before you created habitat, or
We usually do at least 100, 150 feet.
away from, okay,
Yeah,
so not as
from
far as, not as
Yeah,
far as
from the
250?
shoreline.
Because that would affect how
From
much
the,
they actually
from the-
have
from the-
available for the habitat if they own.
From the point where the bank drops. You know what I'm talking
You'll
about?
go back another 100 feet?
Yeah.
Okay, just.
We definitely don't want to conflict with other agencies' rules, well, you know, we
We
try
don't
to
want
keep the
to
picture
make
in
it hard
mind.
quality anyways.
Have you done an assessment of the wildlife that's been displaced in the regions where you clear cut?
The vast majority of New Hampshire is forested. So forested critters that require forest, it's really no issue. The issues, the critters that are really declining right now are the critters that need that sort of in-between habitat, not the field, not the forest, but the in-between habitat, which is young forest and shrublands. And so those are the ones that are really dwindling. There are multiple, many different species: towhees, golden-winged warblers, blue-winged warblers, chestnut-sided warblers, tons of species that are declining because they don't have that. The forested wildlife are not facing those same issues.
Because it seems to me what you're doing is habitat engineering, and that there's a balance. You know, certain species survive or don't survive because of the environment that you're in. And all of a sudden now, well, okay, we're going to do this to this habitat, we're going to do this, and you're throwing off all these balances. And I think we're going to be at the point where, in order for your rabbit program to survive, you're going to start doing predator control, which is going to throw it off even more, which is a great concern to me.
We've already seen a change in the balance of how the animals act and react in the area. I mean, I've grown up there all my life, lived there all my life, never seen one rabbit. I've hayed every single one of those fields you see, and a whole bunch around, hundreds of thousands of bales. Never saw one rabbit, never. So my question is when you spent all your money, your $1 million of money, and all of the rabbits die for whatever reason, are we gonna have to be burdened with this for the rest of our lives? With you trying to bring these rabbits back, at what point do you say it's not gonna work here?
Well,
Have you thought of that?
it does enter our minds, and again, we have timelines set to our recovery effort, and we have goals, different sets. So 2015, we expect to have, in New Hampshire, I believe we committed to having around 600 acres of our 2,000 acres. And then 2020, an additional 700. And then by 2030, we'll achieve that 2,000. And so that lets us know how we're tracking on reaching that goal. When it comes to the actual reintroduction and how successful we are at the colonization, the augmenting, we really don't have a lot of information on that. And so it's important as we proceed that we implement monitoring to look at survival, so then we can assess the effectiveness. So that's why the radio collars. If we're releasing rabbits and they're all dying to predators, then we know that's a waste of money and that something's not right, and we need to modify, try something else, and if that doesn't work, then we need to learn to make that decision.
So in other words, we're gonna have to deal with this for the rest of our lives, and you're gonna continue to spend money on these rabbits. That's
Right.
basically what you just said.
Right now, our goal is on a 2030 timeline. So 2030, you are definitely going to see actions for the recovery of the New England Cottontail in the state of New Hampshire and all of the surrounding states. At that point, I am not sure. When it comes to recovery with some species, we do have a set timeline of an agreement, say, with a willing landowner, that we assess and decide when to quit. But right now, we have the 2030 as to achieve our goals to succeed.
So it sounds like you're in conjunction with other states around us, working together with them on this project.
Oh, there's so many. Not just states. All the New England states minus Vermont, because they don't have rabbits. So New England states minus Vermont plus New York, plus Environmental Defense Fund, Wildlife Management Institute. We've got statewide land trusts like the Forest Society, Audubon Society. We've got businesses like Stonyfield. We had an apple orchardist in Londonderry help out.
PSNH.
PSNH.
I was gonna say that.
Even a zoo.
I was telling Bill, I'm like, yeah, the power line easement would be like perfect.
So that was one of our first actions that we took, is we created an agreement with PSNH to modify how they maintain their right-of-ways. So currently, it's a non-herbicide use. In some other New England states, they selectively herbicide trees. But here, it's a constant clearing on a 3 or 4 year rotation. So we have an agreement that they're going in and they're just removing trees and tree species, so targeting an oak, ash, anything of that nature, and leaving the underbrush. So then the habitat is consistently available to the rabbits in all of these corridors. So that is huge, because now we have connectivity for those dispersing juveniles, which, like John said, the reproduction and the replacement of individuals is key to how they survive. With a high rate of predation, 35% survival, they need to offset that. So that connection is key. And we're seeing really positive results. They started that in 2009. So some areas have been left to grow for about 4 years, and we're seeing the rabbits using them and dispersing into
Where are you
others.
seeing that?
If I could just,
Stonyfield area in Merrimack. Yep, and which is great because we're working with the town. They own a parcel down through the power line corridor, and we're seeing the rabbits starting to naturally make their way there as we speak. So.
yeah, if there are thresholds that aren't being, met in terms of like a wild population after, population augmentation and stuff like this, there definitely will be, the plug will be pulled on pieces of.
Mrs. Townsend asked a minute ago how many rabbits were going to be released. We only care about this area here. We don't care about the whole state.
Sure.
Okay.
So how many rabbits are going to be released here and when? Is it going to
Well,
be?
that's
Is it going to be broken
I
up?
thought you said 350.
That's the goal for the final population in the whole area.
Right
So-
now, the first release would be.
We have about half a dozen right now to, maybe by the end of the summer, we'd be looking at 2 to 3 dozen. No,
By the
there's-
end of this year, 2 or 3 dozen.
That would be about the maximum I would
So
expect.
next year, hypothetical, next year, when none of them are alive, what are you going to do then?
Well, first we'll have to look at why aren't they alive and determine, was it predation, was it they ran away from the habitat? I'm not sure, I can't say what I would do because it would depend on what the cause of mortality was. Is it some sort of recreational impact I didn't expect?
I want to tell you that area is a huge area for dogs.
Yep.
And
We're
moose
aware.
dogs. And they also, I know, you probably know that they stock pheasant there,
Mhm.
and they hunt with the dogs. So the dogs are gonna go probably rabbit hunting too.
Sure. And again, these are things that we're aware of, and a lot of the hunting that we know, the primary use is much lower as far as I've been aware, but we know that that's a conflict.
Yeah.
The other thing is when the rabbit was in this area here, we did have a collar. We did track it during the hunting season, and the dogs did not seem to have an impact on that rabbit. The rabbit would stay.
They're bird dogs, right?
Yeah.
They're bird dogs, yeah.
They're bird
Versus
dogs.
beagles.
So if I can get back to my question,
Yeah.
it was a long one. If at the end of the year, your rabbits are all dead, how many are you going to put out next year, potentially?
So right now, our target is to do releases anywhere from 20 to 30 individuals at a time. Based on the science, there's going to be a loss just right upon release that occurs. And so the science says you need to release quite a few for some to stick.
So you're going to do maybe next year then another 30?
We may repeat it. We
30.
may repeat it to know
So
for
if the
sure.
next year you come back and there's no rabbits left,
I think that by then we'll be moving on to different areas and assessing, what's going on in the landscape. But we have a lot of different places to do this augmentation. We have other populations that are going to be expanding, And so we don't want to get stuck in one place and put all of our efforts there.
That's our question. I mean,
Yes.
we,
Oh, no.
we all
We'll-
know that area better than anybody else in the state and far better than you folks.
Mhm.
So if we know what's gonna happen down there, or surmise greatly based on the history, there's no rabbits there. So if you guys keep spending money and spending money and spending money and getting no results, that's a concern to us.
And I completely agree. And so what I can say though is that we will do it more than once until we can figure out what the variable is. So we can't just do it one year and decide that it's not gonna work forever. We do have to go through a process and with the radio telemetry, and we're going to be getting advice and expertise from researchers across the range, you know, as to how to look at that information and make a good judgment call. But we will be doing that because like I said, we've got a lot of goals and we don't wanna just sit here the whole time.
Where do you get the bunnies, and do you have like a support for them? When you first put them out there, do you kind of support them in any way, like a feeding station or something?
Yeah, there's a couple different schools of thought or different research that has come out about how to support them. So we have a zoo in Rhode Island called Roger Williams Park Zoo that is doing the initial husbandry of the rabbits. So we're taking a small amount of individuals from different parts of the range, and they're breeding them there, and then the offspring are coming to facilities like the one we have at Great Bay here in Newington. So we have an enclosure that's about 1 to 1.5 acres. And what we do is we release the young rabbits in there, and this gets them accustomed to natural food sources because they've been in captivity this whole time. We're not certain, it's almost like trying to undomesticate any domestication that happened. It's not 100%, but you know, it ensures us that they have some natural instincts.
Yeah, just don't want, like, throw them out.
Exactly. So from there, we'll take them out and we'll do what's called a hard release. A hard release is no supplemental feeding and no pens or enclosures out on site. Some programs do what's called a soft release, and they'll actually construct a temporary fencing solution out there, and they will provide food anywhere from 6 days to about 12 to 15 days. This is used often when you have younger rabbits. Again, they haven't had this few-week acclimation period, so they are trying to get them to show some natural instinct, and we're hoping to bypass that because I don't want to be hauling out fence to all of these areas. I'm a little concerned about a predator getting in this temporary enclosure. You know, it would take a lot of work to dig it underground and such. And if something did get in there, then it would be a sitting duck situation. So for right now in New Hampshire, we're going from the zoo to this facility for acclimation to a hard release outside. And we'll be monitoring the effectiveness of that as we proceed.
Are there any agricultural exemptions to the protection of the rabbit under the law?
John, I defer to you, I'm not sure.
There is, under the state law, whether I can recall the exact language, there's an exemption for both agriculture and forestry. No, it's like no regular agricultural or silvicultural practice. I mean,
What's the RSA?
2112A.
2112?
A.
212A?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's specific, paragraph in there, no regular practices of agriculture and silviculture will be prohibited as a result of this act. In the language, when it comes to the environmental review, like the Blanding turtle stuff, it says that, it's written as legislation generally is. It's more like the guidelines and everybody else has to figure out there. It says the state will do what is reasonable, and state and other agency, it's in that case DES, who's the one that's giving, providing the permit, will do what is reasonable and prudent to protect habitat deemed critical to wildlife, so.
So since we're all neighbors and the butters of this and stewards, would we be able to communicate with you or email or something, or?
Yeah, actually, I have a,
Especially if we see something like, you know, some things that you can't see because you're not there, like a lot of foxes or.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Because we've noticed that sort of thing.
there, I have email addresses for a lot of the neighbors, but actually not all of them.
It's actually pretty much
So-
everyone that's not here. Yeah.
And so I've been sending, for those people who I have email addresses for, I've been sending out periodic updates about what we're doing on the property. And so I'm, you know, on your way out, we can record your email addresses. And
That's just, well, if we see things.
And we'll leave cards and, you know, whatever,
Yeah, 'cause
our
like,
numbers, what.
in our area, we have a couple of hawks now.
Yes.
3 or 4 at least. I've seen them.
What I'm saying is, so what Sherry's saying is, so say if we see a dozen hawks
We
showing
all
up,
have livestock,
Yeah.
then we can,
and we all have
Yeah.
you know, say,
chickens and things, and so these farming type things, we don't really want them moving in, but we also, you know, if the rabbits can survive, I mean, I feel like, I guess I sort of feel like they really have a slim chance of surviving, but I don't want to be, you know.
I wanna, well, there was a question here before.
I just quickly wanted to ask, we had this discussion at the Conservation Commission meeting the night you were there, about diseases that the rabbits can procure. I mean, tularemia is one of them.
Sure.
That's another concern. I know you said when they came out of the lab, they will be pristine and they won't have any problems, but you're releasing them into the wild and all bets are off at that point, so what's the control? They are
Sure.
tick-borne.
Well, again, the reason we do very thorough examination is when you have a high density of any organism, especially in a captive environment, that's when you're most likely going to see the popping up of these diseases that exist in very low levels, usually in the wild. And I think with agricultural animals and things, you see the similar, it's the conditions and things that bring on vulnerability and offset. When we put them out in the wild, we will be monitoring them in the beginning, you know, with the radio telemetry and so forth, and any carcasses that we will find, we've set up a diagnostic facility to be able to do necropsies. So at that point, we'll be able to monitor if that was the cause of death for any disease. As for the likelihood of disease to suddenly show up if it didn't come from the captive environment, if we know they're coming out clean, it is very unlikely because they're in such low densities on the landscape that it's going to show up from some exposure with a wild population that's out there.
Well, I hear you, but we know that ticks have been spread by birds in areas that they weren't before. Are you going to be posting your results somewhere so people can keep an eye on, okay, you have had this many fatalities, we've determined from autopsies it's due to this, or we think it's due to this. Are you going to have that information available and updated for people to see?
We do reports. We don't post anything online, but they are public documents. I'm sure
Well, because the moose license plate, some of the funds for that are going into this project. Those reports are done annually, and those are online. You just Google moose plate.
So they wouldn't be done like seasonally or you
No, but
have
if
to
you-
wait an entire year to find out what's going on?
No, you would just call and say, do you have any, or, you know, if you want us to set something up where you get notified of what the results are quarterly or whatever, we
How
can
often would
provide
you
the
be coming out monitoring?
information.
Would you actually be coming to Bellamy, walking around looking for rabbits?
Sure. So our protocol right now is upon release, they'll be tracked 5 to 7 times for the first week to 15 days. And so that's just the longer time
Do
period.
you go out to the field for that, or do you?
Yep, we would go out into the field. Yeah, we don't have the GPS type collars. It's such a small animal, and I don't think the technology is available at a reasonable cost. And so the other thing is, if there is a mortality, we want to retrieve the carcass. So we need to be out there periodically to get it, because obviously scavengers, right? So in the first 2 weeks, we want to be very on top of that, be there. That way we can start tracking the dispersal, because that's another major factor for success. So the higher quality the habitat, the more likely the rabbits are going to stay there. If it's lower quality, they have a likelihood to scatter off and run, and that means a very poor chance of success, because the habitat, they may not find it at that point. And so, I kind of lost where I was at. You know, basically we'll be going out to make sure they're not dispersing, and that will be an indication, okay, the habitat quality is good, they're sticking tight, check. Okay, as we proceed, you know, then I would anticipate the predation to start coming in if they haven't dispersed. Is it thick enough to deter predators? Check. You know, will we be seeing some death of other causes that we can't quite identify?
So the first week you come five times, and then when?
And then we'd go 3 to 5 times for another 2 weeks. And then we would go down from there to roughly about 1 time a week towards the end of the first year. And that, what we would do is document the survival. We're measuring survival as to going into the winter. But our ultimate goal of measuring success is there a breeding pair in that patch to recreate the process the next year? And so, you know, we're still coming up with the protocols, because we're not always going to be using telemetry, because it's very in-depth. We'll use it in the beginning to inform things that we don't know, but then we'll come up with a less invasive long-term monitoring strategy. And one thing is, I've been discussing with UNH, you know, we have the DNA technology that we can actually get down to detecting number of individuals within a reasonable basis. So we can use that to look at reproduction. And then there's also a hormone technology that you can use that may be an indication of predation rates over time. Because not only is it not like the predator stress, excuse me. So maybe they're not actually getting the rabbits, they're surviving, but the stress can be enough that they will not be able to reproduce, which makes our effort not successful. And so we will be looking to follow up with UNH to create a strategy to use that as an index perhaps in the future.
The way you track them, how is that? Do you have to find the animal, or is it something that you can track and seek out each animal?
It'll be finding the animal with triangulation. So if we can't get right to the animal for some reason, you know, it's an isolated patch, so there's a chance we could get pretty close to it. But we don't want to walk around so much that we create paths in that thicket. It's been shown that if we're walking around so much, we're creating entries for the predators.
I'm just saying, if you want to find it, are you going to be able to tell if it's dead or alive, or if it's moving?
The collars have a mortality signal. So if it doesn't move over a certain period of time, it detects and the signal shifts.
So as soon as you go out there and start searching, you'll see a blip that one of them is
Dead or not.
Dead or not.
Yep.
I've been moving for a while.
Yep. And so, but if we don't get right on top of them, because again, sometimes it's more harassment than necessary, what we do is we go from one point, we get a direction, and we mark it with a compass. We go to another point, mark a direction, and just triangulate the location. And really, again, maybe it's not within the 10, 20 acre patch. We don't need to necessarily know it's right here, but we want to know that it's within it, and if they're using 1/2 of it.
Do you have that equipment here?
Actually, I didn't bring any telemetry. It's just a radio receiver set to
An H-shaped antenna, a directional antenna.
Well, we could, you know, once we do release, we could take folks out, you know, and show
Technology, yeah.
show you how we do it.
Put the earphones on so you can hear what it sounds like.
Track a rabbit.
Yeah.
And then if you hear them flying away, then you're looking for a red-tailed hawk.
What should we do if we find one of the instruments, or a dead rabbit for that matter? Is there a phone number we can call?
Yeah, I have some cards with me, and that is definitely, sometimes we put information right on the equipment itself, like a phone number and who to call. I've had that happen with turtle research I've done before. I've gotten phone calls, so. But I'll give you a card as well. And again, I'm a primary contact for this project, so anytime I'm available.
The thing that comes to mind for me after reading a lot of material about the program, the state of Maine has listed these as endangered.
Mhm.
The state of Hampshire is listed them as endangered. They're not listed federally yet,
Mhm.
but if they were to get listed federally, we're, I think, looking at maybe a higher level of regulation as far as
Yeah.
feds are concerned, as opposed to what we're looking at now.
Right, right.
And one reason I think that we want to see this succeed as much as possible is to head that off. Because, you know, when you talk about what happens when you're mowing hay and so forth, there could be federal regulations and guidelines that are going to be much more restrictive than what we're facing right now, and so forth. So,
But I still look at my hay field and I cut it, so.
yeah,
That's right.
Sure.
but,
Not that I want, you know, I don't wanna be, you know.
but I'm the same
I
situation.
I mean, it's been cut for the last, you know, 50 years, so it's gonna be cut for more.
But I'm in the same situation as you, because in terms of mowing fields, you are gonna run into wildlife.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. And I think as far as you folks are concerned, this is not deliberative in terms of there being a casualty
Right.
due to your activity,
Well, like
or my activity.
Like, sometimes I mow at night, like I said before, and I'll come across where the deer have been all
Yes.
summer long.
Yeah, you see,
But they're not there when I go through.
and beyond that,
They're gone, they're gone.
these rabbits are or are not nocturnal.
They're like early dusk, early
Diurnal.
evening, yeah, they're not nocturnal necessarily. They really are active, like right around dusk when it's all nice and quiet.
And of course, some ecologists came up with the name of it, crepuscular.
Thank you, that was the word that was alluded to.
Crepuscular.
So, but they're at the
Active
end of the days.
At dawn and dusk. It's
Yeah.
crepuscular.
Thank you, that one eluded me this evening.
Unfortunately, I've been able to forget it since ecology one.
When you were at the,
Basically, they won't be out there when I'm mowing.
when you were at the Conservation Commission, you mentioned that the rabbits
I
wouldn't hurt.
defer,
I don't mow at night all the time anyway, it's just if the, you know, if it's dry and I'm busy and it needs to be done, it gets done. You know, you hay when the hay is there.
It's perfectly fine with me.
You mentioned at the Conservation Commission that the rabbits wouldn't hurt gardens,
Yes.
and my research says that that's not true.
Now, they,
And my concern is if your rabbits start breeding like rabbits and they come over to my garden area, and I'm gonna have a bigger garden this year, and I think pretty much we all have gardens, what am I gonna do to get rid of them?
If they're feeding out in your garden, they're likely to be Eastern cottontails, and then we got big problems.
Well, if I haven't seen any rabbits yet, you're not gonna introduce a different species of rabbit because you're bringing in New England cottontails, so that doesn't hold water in my book.
you know, I'd be very surprised, again, just that, especially if you're expanding your garden, you've got a lot of edges that aren't there. That's just not their primary behavior. If you do have a problem with that, I would love to know about it. And, you know, again, this agricultural clause, you know, we could look into that if that's a situation that we remove the rabbits from direct harm. I'm not quite clear how to tell you about that, but my first thought is that it's just very unlikely. That's just not their primary behavior. They really stick close. They're not good at avoiding predators. So to get to your place, they have to use good quality habitat that whole duration.
That actually has been a subject of resource at UNH back in the 90s. They took Easterns and New England cottontails, put them in a pen, different with the same amount of cover and an open area. And it was clear that the New England cottontails would stick close to cover because they don't have a big enough eye surface to see the predators coming. Whereas the Eastern cottontails, you know, their eyes like this, New England's are like this. So the Easterns can actually see the predators coming. They will take more risks to go find food. They'll go much further away to go find food. They're more likely to go into your garden to go find food. New England Cottontails aren't, because they're gonna get picked off.
I do want to, bring up, I mean, Eastern Cottontails, I think for those of you who aren't familiar, that is one of the big problems, and of course, Fish and Game Departments didn't help the problem in terms of, back when the idea about what was the better rabbit to hunt, the Eastern Cottontails were brought into a lot of, places where they hadn't existed before, from, southern states and Midwestern states, and then released. And they're not in direct competition with New England Cottontails, but they are so much better adapted to a variety of habitats that when they get established in an area, so you could go down to Portsmouth, for example, or Newcastle Island, or whatever, drive around and, see rabbits running all over the place. Those are Eastern Cottontails. They can, they'll have their litters in garden boxes. They just need a little yew bush to hide under. They're completely different in their behavior and adaptation. And the one physical measurement of this that the graduate student had back in the 90s was the eye, the actual, their ability to be able to see better. So that is a different species, and there are places where you can go not far from here in New Hampshire and see a ton of rabbits, but they're the Eastern Cottontail. We hope they don't show up on the Bellamy.
Do they both have the white tail?
Yeah, yeah. They're the way we're distinguishing them for certain in the field is Heidi was talking about. The way we get DNA is we just collect the poop, and that's so that's how the two are
So you
distinguished.
can't tell them apart?
You can if you get them in hand, but and even then, you kind of have to be experienced. There's a substantial size difference. The New England Cottontail is a little bit smaller. There's a few things like a white dot on an Eastern Cottontail's forehead. It's there most of the time, but may not be there at some point. And then there's black linings on their ears that vary between the two species. But as John said, our surveys, we rarely see the rabbit, let alone have it in hand to catch those types of descriptions. And so we do it from that non-invasive sampling of their pellets that they leave behind. The Eastern Cottontail, we're very certain we know where the range is right now, and we have not focused any of our recovery efforts in those areas to prevent that drain of resources with competition. And we're watching for any change in their habitat range over time. We haven't documented any change. In Massachusetts and Connecticut, they live sometimes in the same patches, but we don't have that here. They're very separated, and there's a few things about them physiologically, like what types of food they could survive on, that may explain that, but it's pretty far.
Are they interbreed?
They don't. Nope. We've got all this DNA from surveying with the pellets over the years, and there's a distinction between the two species, no evidence of overlap. And then we have anecdotal information from those game farms in like the 1930s and such, that they said, oh, I don't know why these rabbits aren't breeding. They weren't distinguishing between the two species, so it is assumed that in those situations it was the two different species that were placed together for breeding. Again, it's something that we watch by doing DNA in general. The concern is that not that they might hybridize, but perhaps they try to reproduce, and just by the act of trying to reproduce, they're blocking good interactions with the same species, so it's inadvertently affecting reproduction, possibly, but we don't have the science to back that
So
up.
the one that you found here is New England?
Yep. The Eastern Cottontails that we found, Portsmouth, Newington, I often refer to 101 as sort of that line, north and south, that's the divide. So we have a blank slate in some of the towns north of 101, Newmarket, Newfields, Exeter. We did have an eastern cottontail that showed up in Durham at one of our wildlife management areas, completely isolated and alone, and that was a situation that we assumed perhaps it was captured and moved, because it was there, it wasn't there, then it was there. There was no evidence of any around it. So I get phone calls from people who capture rabbits from Massachusetts and bring them in state. So right now, that is the only movement that we've seen. It was isolated. We moved it back and haven't seen it reappear.
I would think that you'd see quite a few rabbits being released now from people not being able to maintain them and keep them anymore.
It's definitely something we have to watch. You know, every time we're putting out information, we're trying to make sure that we're letting people know the distinction of these two species. But it's one of those things that we need to monitor and adapt to. So as you said, you know, as we proceed, we need to look at where we're failing and where we're succeeding. If we notice that suddenly rabbits are moving all around and we've got a serious problem, then we're going to have to make a different decision on how to proceed. But until now, we've only had that one documented case, and we're hoping that our education will prevent it in the future.
And how long ago was that you found that one?
That one, 2010, and we tracked it out in 2012. I think the first time we documented it was 2010, but we don't get our results back immediately from the labs. Sometimes we wait all winter and get all of our samples and then send it in one block. So I don't think I found out it was in Eastern until late 10, early 11, and then we moved it in 2011, 2012.
So based on what you just said with the tracking that you're going to do and the testing that you're going to do once you release these, are you going to wait and combine all your results to do the same way that you just said, or are you going to be sending in results? I mean, if you're tracking the rabbits and you're getting feces samples and all of that, are you going to be sending that in weekly, or are you not, or are you going to save it like you just said you did?
It's a different result that we're looking for. So when we're tracking these rabbits that are being released, we have the radio collars. So we'll be getting information every time we go out there. When we collect the pellets, we're just looking for presence-absence data on an annual basis, what patches are occupied or not. So we just ship it all at once, refresh our maps, and go back and survey annually. So we don't have that immediate need for answers, per se.
I'm wondering if we could start a log for the email address.
Definitely.
Very informative.
Oh, good.
I think I've lost my pen, but,
Thank you folks for coming to do this.
oh no, it's, you know, it's our pleasure to make sure that we're communicating, because we understand, you know, from before, the Bellamy is a very unique neighborhood in that people do care, and so we'd like to have that dialogue.
Do you have any cards I can put?
Yes, yes.
There were, generally the newsletter.
Here, I'll pass them around for information.
I didn't bring any cards, but I just sent an email to the neighborhood last week, so I'll just email everybody. Well, of course you did, because I didn't have your email address.
That's not something we have access to.
But I will send everybody that email that I sent last week, so you'll get that, and it'll have my contact information on it.
Seems like everything will be more like power lines and oh, the turkeys, the deer, coyote on the barn. Yeah, they pretty much don't, yeah, they pretty much stop in my house. Pretty much stop there, yeah. There's a little weird too.
So yeah, please contact me with any additional questions. Again, I try to respond within about a a 2-day time frame, because sometimes I may be out in the field when I get your message, but definitely contact me as